What is up, people of YouTube? I'm your host Vernon. This is Horsepower Cove. Let's fish that. Alright, ladies and gents, today I want to attempt something that's completely crazy, and I kind of need to explain why. This is now the third year that I've been fishing here at Lake Mead, and every year had its own different set of challenges. This year in particular, with the water dropping that much, it's always been difficult to find a good fishing spot, seeing as how it constantly keeps changing. And that is because Lake Mead gives out a couple acre feet of water every year. It needs to do so. It's water that goes down to California for growing some food as well as drinking water. But every year it's kind of balanced, because when Lake Mead lets water out, we also get some water from Lake Powell. Whereas this year, Lake Powell, also being kind of empty, didn't let any water go out. That is why Lake Mead's water dropped that drastically this year. But why am I talking about the water levels? Well, that is quite simply because the water levels determine where we can fish. Now that's been getting increasingly difficult this year, especially normally you drive down to the water, you pack out your fishing stuff and you just do some fishing. But this year it's been quite difficult. There's no places where you can drive right to the water. A lot of people have tried and some have gotten stuck in the mud. The top layer looks dry, but there's about 3 feet or 1 meter's worth of mud below the surface. So driving onto this stuff, you're gonna sink in and it's difficult to get the vehicles out. So the best course of action is to park somewhere and go for a hike and try and find some fishing spots. Now that is what we're going to be doing out here today at Horsepower Cove. Remember, you need to be on the outside of the marina before you can start fishing. And the idea is I'm going to be walking around trying to see if we find any fish and cast to them. Now, because we are walking around, I'm going to try and pack as light as possible. Yes, you still need some water when going out into the desert, but I'm only packing one rod with me. Now, this is where the idea gets a bit crazy. I want to set myself a certain challenge, and the challenge I want to set for today is that one rod I'm going to use, it's going to be a fly rod. Now, I don't think I've ever caught any fish out of Lake Mead on flies, and that's going to be my goal for today, using all sorts of flies and seeing if we can get anything. All right, ladies and gents, let's start off by looking at the gear. I'm using my 8-foot 5-weight fly rod out there today. I have 2 fly fishing rods, a 3-weight and a 5-weight. 3-weight is meant for small mountain streams catching small little trout, whereas the 5-weight is a bit more of a backbone, you can catch some bigger fish. But typically when fishing something like a lake, you want bigger than 5, anything up to 8 or 10, especially when you want to catch carp or some big bass. You need something like an 8-weight. We only have a 5, so that has to do. Likewise, when fishing a lake, you want something like intermediate or sinking line, anything that has lead forward so you can cast and have it sink down into the water to get to the right depth. I only have floating line, so unfortunately I have to use what I have. Don't have sinking line, only have the floating line, but we'll see if we can get our lures down to the fish. So when talking about flies, you normally think of something like this. In this little case we have quite a selection of flies, normal little woolly buggers and quite a lot of nymphs. This is typically what you'll use on a fly rod, especially when trying to catch trout, but I don't think there's any trout left here. So we're not going to try for any trout today, so no, we're not really going to be using any of these type of flies. We might still use some of the nymphs, try and find some small fish when all else has failed. So we are rather going to be using some specialty flies, something like this. This is a little popper. You pop it on top of the water and it makes a noise. It's the same idea as the bass poppers. This is just a little fly to do that. I'm going to start off with this. It would be ideal to do this early in the mornings or late in the afternoons, sunrise, sunset. That's when this is the best. That's when you have the best chance of using a little popper like this to get the fish. But I'm going to throw that around in any case. Maybe we get lucky and get on some fish. And then I have all sorts of different flies that I'll swap out to while we move around, and I'll explain as we go along. Now this of course is something that I've never fished with before. I understand how it works, you need to pop it in the water, but I'm not really sure how you do that with a fly rod. That's what I want to do out there today. I want to test different things, I want to grow my skill sets and learn how to do these types of things. So let's start by casting. Now what I'm thinking to try and get the little popper to pop, so I'm going to have to strip line quite quickly. And that seems to do the trick. Unfortunately, it's a very small fly, hard to see, but it does give quite a pop. Now I just need to try and find out where the fish are. If we can get this close to some fish, maybe they'll be willing to go for it. Alright guys, that little popper looks pretty good in the water. The way it moves and the sound it makes, pretty happy with that. I think if we can find a boil somewhere, we're sure to get on some fish with that thing. But the sun's up, fish tend to not go for top water lures during the day, especially when the sun's high in the air. So I'm thinking maybe swapping out to a different fly. And I'm thinking of using a little craw imitation fly. We know there are bass around. Maybe getting some smallmouth or largemouth bass using a little craw imitation fly. So I'm going to throw that around. Let's see if we get anything. This is of course the first time that I'm using this type of lure, the little craw thing. Just want to see how it looks in the water, how it acts. Looks pretty good. This is of course the closest thing that I can think of as kind of using like a little Ned rig. That's why I want to try that. Alright guys, a bit of an update. I'm finding it very difficult to put this little craw imitation thing down. If I had several fish go for it, I try to set the hook and I just rip it away from them. Mistakes on my part, something that I still need to figure out when to try and set the hook. But it's now been a couple of hours, seeing a lot of fish go for the thing, but at the last moment they turn away. I think the look of this little lure is not perfect, but it's good to see some interest in it. But I think it's time to swap out to a different lure. Alright, so I'm aware that I'm highly optimistic thinking that I will be able to catch fish using flies only here in Lake Mead. Lake Mead is not known for fly fishing. But I have to say, I have had a few bass follow some of my lures. It always gives you that bit of hope. but unfortunately thus far haven't caught anything. And by this point I've already lost 5 different flies, most of my crawdad imitations. So at the moment I'm swapping over to some smaller flies, little leech pattern and tiny little nymph. Let's see if maybe there's some smaller fish around. There we go. We got ourselves a tiny little green sunfish. Totally not the fish that I was hoping to get today, but at least we got a fish, not gonna get skunked. It's on the tiny little nymph. Tiny little green sunfish. At least we got something. Thanks for biting, little guy. Let's get him back to the water. And there he goes. But what I'm doing, I'm dropping little nymph near cover. Just got another hit. Very difficult to set the hook on these small fish. At the moment I'm kind of using my little leech as a strike indicator. Found some slightly deeper water. And along with that, some slightly bigger fish. Still green sunfish, but bigger than the first one. Gonna get him back to the water. It's a bit of a drop. I'm just gonna drop him head first. And there he goes, swimming back to his rock. Third little green sunfish. Lovely blue highlighter colors. Now it's a green sunfish because it's elongated, it's not round, big mouth, and the white and yellow on the fins. Throw this guy back head first, and off he goes. Alright, but we're not just looking for some small fish. Let's walk around a bit more, see what else we can find. And lo and behold, more sunfish. Lovely colors on this one. Let's just release him. There he goes, to my foot. Find some hiding place. Alright, ladies and gents, I had a hope for something a bit bigger than some green sunfish, but a fish is still a fish. Caught that on fly rod, so that counts as the first fish ever caught from Lake Mead using some fly rods. Now I said to myself that I'll give myself something like 4 hours from different flies to see what I can get out there, and at the end of the day I spent something like 8 hours out here, and that is simply because it is so difficult to put down the rod. That is one of the things that I cannot translate in these videos. Yes, I can show you the footage of all the little green sunfish I caught something like 10 of them. Or I can show you all the footage of the fish that I almost caught, but I mean, almost catching is not actually catching. There was 3 little stripers around, cast a little fly in between them, moved that, got a striper on, but even before I could turn on the little camera, it cut off the line and I lost that fly. That was the theme for today. Lost quite a lot of flies, but I also learned quite a lot. All the footage that I can show you of all the fish, I doubt that you even will be able to see the fish. A lot of times it's just bass looking at the lures or following the little lures. And that is the fun part, seeing how the fish are reacting to your little flies in the water and seeing how they move, how they react. Now that is unfortunately something that I cannot translate in this video, but it was always a tall order from the beginning using a fly rod here at Lake Mead. Not something that every angler does, and I really wanted to try that out, and it is something that I will do again, but most likely I won't do another video on it. Unfortunately, not catching fish is not that exciting, I get that, but it is still fun using a fly rod out there, and it's something I will continue to do. And if you have a fly rod, I would encourage you to try and use your fly rod out there. I think little poppers were good for the stripers, especially if there's boils happening. And these crawdad things, the fish were very keen on them, just not grabbing them. So just finding the right colors might be the trick. But if you have any hints or tips for me on how to use a fly rod, please go down in the comments. Feel free to ask any questions down there as well. If you enjoyed this video or learned something from it, please do give me a little thumbs up. And if you're new here, consider hitting the subscribe button, joining my community. I do weekly videos for you guys. Alright guys, but I do hope you would brave the heat and get out there and enjoy some fishing. But I want to thank you for following me on this weird trip. And like always, I'll see you next time.